Okay, if I may, I'd like to play the video that we put together from our trip to Cyprus. We took the pictures from the trip and we put them into this rolling video because we were so impressed with what's being done there that we're actually taking components of this and looking at doing something with the Department of Mental Health. Carl McKnight in the back of the room is part of that, and then Darce Keller, Colonel Darce Keller from the California National Guard, went with us to Cyprus, and we're hoping to do something like this here in America. It would be the first time ever. So let me show this 2-minute video to give you an idea of what it was like. Thank you, and of course this was possible only because of the Canadian forces allowing us to go and observe this decompression program. So we hope that they see this as a tribute to their hard work and our appreciation for the time with them. So if we can turn the lights up, please. Okay. So our next panel is Healing the Body. And I would like to bring up our three panel members. Shannon O'Kelly, the Associate Director of Operations, Clinical Services, UCLA Health System. See, we do involve UCLA now and then. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Baseman, Head of Rehabilitation Medicine, Canadian Forces Health Services Group. And Caroline Robert, the Manager of the Injured Soldiers Network and Section Head of the Soldier On. Please come forward. Shannon?
show a video first. I thought it'd be good to, this is a great overview of our program, and then I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about our Wounded Warriors and what our program is all about. So.
We find ourselves now as a country really breeding a generation of service members who are surviving wounds that years ago would have otherwise died in battle. So there's an entire generation of us returning from war with these injuries that America really hasn't seen. And it changes your life in an instant. The vehicle I was in struck an improvised explosive device, and through a 26-ton vehicle filled with Marines, chow, and ammunition, a good 10 feet in the air. I knew right away that I was on fire.
I was doing a regular combat patrol and got struck with a IED underneath my LAV-25. You feel that first initial fireball come up around you, you're like, oh, I just lost Marines. That's the first thing I thought of.
We rolled right over it and the thing went off. When I came out, I was engulfed in flames from head to toe. I mean, I could hear the bullets flying right by my head. One of my Marines put me out with a fire extinguisher. I guess my adrenaline kind of just shut off, and that's when the pain kicked in.
We started getting shot at, so we got into a firefight to the south. My radio man and I, we crossed an irrigation ditch. You know, we both fell in. We're both pulling each other out. Get up on the other side. He said, switch spots, sir. I said, okay. And I slide over. He picks up, steps around behind me, and right where I was at, he stepped on a mine. It blew me back. I was blinded, but I couldn't move my arm, couldn't get up, so I started calling for help, and then everything went black.
There was a matter of at least a couple months right after I was wounded where I couldn't look at myself in the mirror.
When I first woke up, you know, I had a big bandage on my face. I felt like I was, you know, Joker in the Batman. You know, I saw it and I was so let down, and I was just so upset. Are people going to think differently? You know, is my wife going to still think of me the same?
People make fun of you. I can take it, I'm a grown man, but when you see your kids suffering from that, that's when it really, really hurts.
It's one thing to come out of combat having lost an arm or a leg, but when it's your face, I don't get to take off my uniform, ever. I wear it everywhere I go.
Operation MEND is a unique collaboration between us here at UCLA and Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas.
The goal was to be able to bring the unique clinical services that the private sector has in partnership with the military to provide them with a level of plastic surgery that gives them both hope and, in some cases, somewhat complete restoration of their face.
It is an opportunity to really give back something to these young men and women who have given so much to me, my family, our country, in terms of what they have done.
They're all young individuals who have had their lives just incredibly disrupted. The effects that the program has on the lives of these injured men and women is very real.
If their eye is closed, if we can open it in the first operation, then all of a sudden their attitude changes completely, because hope springs as a result of little successes.
As I've come out of the operating room looking better and better each time, that makes each day better and better. And that makes my life and my kids' lives better and better each day.
Family's the #1 thing in my life. My daughter, she told me the other day, Dad, your boo-boos are going away finally.
This organization has changed my life, changed my recovery, in knowing that I'm going to be able to get back to where I want to be in my self-image.
It's a big morale booster, you know. I'm not going to say I don't get stared at, because I do, but it makes me feel a little bit more, I guess you could say more of a human being, more like the way I was.
Many of these patients have presented problems that are the most difficult I've ever seen. And I have yet to hear anybody complain. Their character is really infectious in a way.
It's a very powerful community effort, and to see people who've never seen such terribly injured people and also have no affiliation with the military reaching their arms out and participating is just joyous.
We like to pride ourselves to think that we form a cocoon for them. We provide a buddy family service, so they always have a one-to-one contact with someone, so they get to know a variety of people personally, so they never feel alone while they're here.
Probably one of the great things I saw recently was one of the daughters of one of the buddy families met the patient, and she said she's 12 years old. The first time I met him, I saw his scars. Since then, I just see him. It's an expensive program, but it's extraordinarily worthwhile. And our philosophy is that no one gets turned down that's referred to us.
In 2007, I think we operated on 2 patients. In 2008, I think it was up to something like 12 or so. And then in 2009, around 20.
They take up whole facilities of ours, but we're not stopping.
Now we've expanded the Operation Mend program to explore new approaches to traumatic brain injury, and even exploring things such as limb transplantation. These are the new challenges that we're partnering with the military as we face these injuries.
Yeah, it's unfortunate there are guys following in my footsteps, but if they can make an impact with me, they definitely have the doorway to start helping other soldiers.
These are true heroes. So the passion that you see in us is really a reflection of the incredible inspiration that these young men and women spill out every day.
As service members, we give so much, and to see other people give back is an awesome feeling.
When people participate in something like Operation Mend, they're showing their thanks and their appreciation in a way that makes America better. I think it shows some of the best qualities, the best attributes of what it means to be an American.
To be lucky enough to be part of this is a great opportunity for myself and my family. So I'm just grateful to be here.
We feel an extraordinary duty to take care of these folks. And every day they teach us that we're right.
Can we turn on the lights, please? I want the lights on because I want everyone in the room to recognize and give Mr. Katz a round of applause. Sir, would you stand up? Thank you for Operation Mend.
appreciate everybody's attention during that short presentation. I often find it kind of hard actually to talk after seeing the video. The courage and I think the love from everyone that you see in there really begins to move me. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the program itself, though. So, you know, we're supposed to be talking in this section about the body, healing the body. I hope what I convey today is that it's not the body per se that we're actually fixing. You can't look at it as a separate, discrete, independent thing. We're talking about the entire holistic component of family, the individual, their spirit, their hopes, their dreams, their prayers, that we're actually addressing when we deal with some of these cases. What we wanted to do is that we wanted to provide a program in Operation Men through Mr. Katz's leadership and his vision. That was a jointly run program, not one that said from UCLA or from any of the other academic medical centers we can do it better, but we wanted to be able to say that we want to be your partners so that we can collaborate with you. Also, that one of our core tenets is that we would treat every single patient with honor, dignity, and respect they deserve. I think when we first started this program back in March of 2007, the military was a little bit hesitant about partnering with us. We're not part of the brotherhood or the sisterhood. We don't understand what it means to be in the military family, and they're right. All we wanted was a chance, an opportunity to be able to participate, to give something back. We know that we get to sleep in warm beds at night, and we need to be able to contribute in some way. That's the leadership at UCLA, as it is amongst a number of other organizations across this country, but we felt like it was a mission of ours that we had to figure out a way to participate. Also, lastly, I wanted to say in terms of our concerns, is that we recognize that every patient is unique. There is no cookie-cutter recipe. Each individual is going to have different needs, different problems, different pain thresholds, different dependencies, different family situations. They're going to come from different parts of the country, and that we pledge that we would understand that and we would treat each individual that came through our program as unique and special. Our initial partner, it's grown now, was with Brooke Army Medical Center. And if you haven't been there, if you have an opportunity to go there, you have to. They do amazing work every single day, and I don't know how they do it. It's so stressful. I think just the emotional load that they deal with on a day in and day out when they deal with wounded warriors coming from Iraq and Afghanistan and other places, it's inspiring. The hair stands up on the back of your neck when you actually walk on campus there. And fortunately, they were the ones who helped us with this partnership in terms of being able to work with us. So how the program works. Basically, we receive medical records from Brooke Army Medical Center, and they're sent to us and are reviewed by our physicians. We conduct a special needs assessment with our surgical team and our administrative team. Again, sticking to that each patient is an individual, needs to be treated as such. Then we contact the patient and family, discuss about possible appointments if they want to come out to LA. It's totally their option. This is a free program for them, and we pay for everything. Again, thanks to the generosity of Mr. Katz and others. We basically wanted to create a program where the decision was taken out of the control of the individual. You don't have to worry about arranging your flights. You don't have to worry about getting appointments. You don't have to worry about TRICARE. You don't have to worry about hotel. You don't have to worry about food. The answer is yes. What's the question? And also, we're going to take care of everything. They've had enough to deal with. Then, as you saw in the short video, we have buddy families. So even when they're here, they may be coming from Rogers, Arkansas, like Aaron Menken. Rogers, Arkansas is very different from Los Angeles, Hollywood, and Beverly Hills. So we need to provide a protective environment when they come here. So we have a select handful, about 30 some odd families now, buddy families, who are assigned to each family when they come in, and they're their home away from home family. In order to help ease the transition between military and the academic world, our head nurse for the program is actually a captain, a former captain in the Army. So she can provide that provide quilts, and you see there for every patient, but she can also provide that combat boot up the rear end when we need their attention. And then we take care of everything when it comes to dealing with the surgeries and the appointments. So again, with the patient in the center, you know, there's these expanding concentric rings of interoperability that provide that level of protection. So the families, the care communication between us and the medical center, and so forth. So, but these next few slides I'm going to show you, and I'm almost done with my talk, is I want to talk to you about the orthopedic and plastic surgery component of our clinical things. We're doing a lot of things. Actually, we have a neurosurgeon currently boots on the ground at a forward operating base in Afghanistan right now, working with military leadership on deploying 3 MRIs in country to help with mild TBI assessments. But we're going to talk about, or I'm going to show you plastic and reconstructive here. So as you saw in the video, that was Aaron speaking, and when he arrived to us, this was after he was completed. This is his finished clinical outcome after his wounds. So he has 3 nostrils, basically, and it wasn't a very functional nose. So the very first procedure was actually to clean up some of that and to begin to lay the foundation for his surgeries. Up until this point, Aaron had probably had 37, 38 procedures, surgeries, prior to coming to us. And so, bless his heart, I don't know how, you know, you keep going to 38 or to 39. So this is during his reconstruction. And basically what you've seen is that we've taken a graft of skin from his forehead and actually flipped it around to actually create the new graft for his nose. And you see it's quite bulbous, but our surgeons say it's easier to take away than it is to add back on. So they get a big schnoz when they first come out. And then you'll notice that there are some Z-plasters there to help release some of the scar tissue. So here it is in the progression. And Aaron's still not finished now. And he was our very first patient in 2007. He's had, I think, close to 15 surgeries with us alone, and he'll have some more. But as you can see, he's starting to progress. The nose is starting, the swelling is starting to go down. His lips are starting to take on a more symmetrical look. And his profile is beginning to be able to pass the grocery store test. That's what most of our patients want. They want to be able to go out in public and not necessarily get stared at or to feel like their kids are embarrassed by their appearance. And so that's what we're attempting to do. Here's one of our latest photos of him here. And you can actually see he has his prosthetic ears on. And, you know, as time goes on, his swelling will go down. His scars will reduce a little bit. And he is a great spokesman, not only for wounded warriors, but also his own struggles as he goes through and conquers his wounds. But he's an inspiration to me and to all of us. Here's Joey Polk. And Specialist Polk was driving along when his vehicle hit a triple stack of anti-tank mines. And it ignited the fuel tank, and you can see that this is what was left of him. Also, this is another procedure where the individual had completed his surgeries and was ready to be medically retired. So he came to us, and in one procedure we did some full thickness skin grafts here, as you can to help reduce the scars that were actually pulling down his eyelids. And here's what he looks like as of October. And you can see it's quite a big difference between when we first received him and when he came here. And here's the full list. And you can almost see in their eyes the spirit returning. When they first come to us, they often have baseball caps pulled over their eyes, big sunglasses, a hoodie pulled over, and sort of slumped forward. Now our patients are going to their PTA meetings. They have a much more positive outlook. So it's not just the body that we're addressing. Here is Octavio Sanchez, and here is his vehicle after it hit an IED. And this isn't water. This is molten aluminum. So you can imagine the temperatures that are generated in these situations. And he lost his arm and was burned over 70% of his body, burned his nose completely off. And here he is, and he's also still not finished. He's going to have some additional forehead work. But, you know, his nose looks pretty normal. It fits his face. And here he is with his lovely family. And I believe he started his own construction company here this last year, so we're very excited about him. This is Captain Barkley, and I'm almost done. A lot of times our wounded warriors have severely burned hands and missing fingers from trying to put themselves out. And after all the work that they've had, this is one area where they often are not spent, a lot of work is not spent on. But the hand, as we've been told, is the first thing that you reach out to. It's used for communication, for grasping, for brushing your teeth, for wanting to play golf. Captain Barkley wants to play golf and he can't play golf. You can see this is his hand. It's frozen in that locked in that curve. He can't open it any farther than that. So we worked with his hands and put in the grafts, and this was before, and here's what it looks like after. He's able to fully open his hands. He's playing golf. He's now playing hockey. He's playing basketball, and he's hunting. So, you know, all of these things are things that may seem, you know, trivial, but are really important. Yes, that's what it looks like. That's a cadaveric hand. These are labels for all the nerves and all the different connections. Dr. Cody Azari has joined our team, and will be doing the first hand transplantation for us this spring. This is Corporal Malone here. Dr. Azari on our team here did his surgery last year, and that is his grafted hand. And he actually pinned Dr. Azari in the arm wrestling match. So as of today, we have 43 patients. We have 4 more in the pipeline, all branches of the service. It doesn't matter if you're active duty or if you're medically retired or otherwise, we're going to take care of you. I think our challenge is how do we get the word out? How do we work with the military to say, you know, give us an opportunity to be able to help out those that may have slipped through the cracks or think they're done or weren't ready then but maybe are ready now. Those are the patients that we want to take care of. Money's not an object, we'll take care of them. Just for these 43 patients, 153 surgeries, around 700 appointments, 1,000 flights. So we have a lot of work and a lot of experience in dealing with logistics and handling these. Our patients actually come from 16 states across the United States. So some of them are from North Carolina or even as close as Orange, and now as far away as Camp Leatherneck. One of the folks that was in the video, actually Sergeant Blaine Scott, a Marine that we had rebuilt his face and his nose and rebuilt his ankle, was just recently redeployed to Kandahar. And that's after 40 some odd surgeries. So that's part of the world that we don't understand. So I'll conclude at that, but thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions. And also thanks to Mr. Katz and Melanie Gideon there in the back who helped run the program.
Thank you, Shannon. This is hard for me to say, but go Bruins on this one. So if I may introduce to you our next panelist, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Baseman, the head of Rehabilitation Medicine for Canadian Forces Health Services Group. Marcus?
Thank you. It's truly an honor and a privilege to be here today amongst you, and thank you for the invitation and hosting this wonderful event. I'm going to speak from the heart, as I tend to do, and Rakesh, my esteemed colleague, who we first met in Washington, actually, at the Wounded Warriors Conference 2 years ago, often says, well, you got to be careful sometimes that you don't let it all out, right? But so I should have a disclaimer slide saying that the opinions expressed by this author may not be the views of the Canadian Forces Health Services Group, right? So But I think some things have to be said, and some of my patients are here today indirectly, and I've expressed to them that I wish to hear from them as well. If anything that we say from a policy perspective isn't what's happening on the ground, because I think that's the problem sometimes, is that us in leadership positions are put into places sometimes where we forget what it's like to be in the trenches. And so I like to get into the trenches once a week at least and be in the clinic and see what's happening to the troops on the ground, so that we're not just generating policies that don't reflect what's happening. So a few things that I'm going to address today is pendulums as they swing from one extreme to the other, grass being greener on the other side of the fence, and lessons learned, which we somehow seem to forget from our past experiences. It was interesting in the coffee line before, somebody said, "Oh, you're from Canada. I hear you do things better there." And I said, "That's interesting, because I hear you do things better down here." And so we often have this perspective that things are better on the other side of the fence, and we have to be careful of that, because I think that perception that must be somebody out there who has the solution, when in fact programs like this one are impressive, and I'm glad to see that there are these gold standard programs that we should all be aware of and ready to refer to when our patients require that extreme level of care. But I'm also cognizant of the fact that rehabilitation of the body, and it's been said over and over again, it's a good segue that Tom was the last speaker in the previous panel, because his story struck my heart in the sense that it's not all about the body. I mean, the nuts and bolts, as I like to call it, it's just one component, but the nuts and bolts sometimes is actually the easier part. It's what's all around the nuts and bolts that's the toughest part to heal. So as far as pendulums, I can give you a perspective where I come from. I was away, that's why there's not a whole lot on my chest here, for 15 years working in civilian practice, and not necessarily by choice. When I left the military in '93, I actually left with tears in my eyes because I wanted to do rehabilitation medicine. It was a time when most NATO countries were cutting back their militaries, and it was judged, because the world was now a safe place, we wouldn't need rehabilitation anymore, at least in the Canadian Forces. And so I had to make the tough decision of what my true passion was. Was it rehabilitation medicine, or was it in fact the military? And it was the last opportunity to go back and do postgraduate training. So I went back and became the head of rehabilitation in the big trauma center, which deals mostly with motor vehicle accident victims. And so even though the context is different, a lot of the injuries that our soldiers sustain and a lot of the physical and psychological trauma is happening on our roads and highways on a day-to-day basis. So I would argue that even though the horrific nature of a lot of these injuries is very much in the forefront now, that the stories that I heard over the 15 years I was out resemble quite closely the stories that I'm hearing from our soldiers, and that the families and the connectedness, the need for peer support, all those things wasn't new to me. So when they called me back in 2008 and said, "Would you lead the rehab program?" one of the key elements that in my mind was crucial for its success was to have peer support, family involvement, the patient-centered approach, and teams involved, and the mental health component clearly being an essential part of that. And I think that's why Rakesh and I hit it off so well, is that this holistic vision is one of the reasons why I decided to go into rehabilitation medicine to begin with, because compartmentalizing the body in various component parts doesn't usually work out too well, at least not from the patient's perspective. As we heard, acute care advances have made it such that we now have 10 injuries for each soldier lost in action, whereas that statistic was likely reversed in the First World War. And so we've come a long way, and that's where I'll be very blunt with you, and a lot of ethical questions come up. I get the casualty sit reps on my desk in the morning. The first thing I check when I come in is who's come through CAF and who's coming through Landstuhl, and then eventually coming back to Canada, because we have a hybrid system in Canada of civilian care providers in 7 centers of excellence that provide rehabilitation care, and we have military personnel that are affiliated with those centers that augment the services provided to our soldiers. So it's important to know well in advance where that soldier is going to be heading when he gets back to Canada. And so you get a very detailed account of what the injuries are. And I have to be honest with you, there are days when you hope that the member will not survive. And in fact, it's really because rehab doesn't end. It's the beginning of a lifelong process. And that's become something that's very near and dear to me, is that from the get-go, it starts on the battlefield. and goes on for a whole life. And as was mentioned, everybody's involved, the community, the family, everyone, the unit is involved in that process. And so sometimes we save lives, but the cost of rebuilding those lives is tremendous. And I don't know that we have it within us to be able to deliver on the goods in terms of that rebuilding. So what we owe to that member, I don't think we can ever deliver on. Now, we're all trying, and don't get me wrong, I think we're all aiming for the same thing, but as far as truly delivering to rebuilding life, or as Rakesh says, I just want my life back, and I hear that on a regular basis, and I think that's a reasonable request, but it's not something that we'll be able to deliver on because of the fact that none of us have the same life after any life-changing event. So in certain circumstances, as I said, when we get those casualty sit reps, it's very crucial to know what those members' needs are. And so to have them directed to a center where they'll be by themselves, which was one of the critical elements of this program, and rehab as an N of 1, which given the small numbers of soldiers we have in Canada, happened fairly regularly. And that was the critique we had from our soldiers, is that they were in an excellent location for clinical care, but they were there by themselves and for many, many months. And so that umbilical cord that connected them with their unit, their buddies, the military, was getting stretched further and further to the point where they never felt part of the military organization anymore. So I remember being in the tarmac in Landstuhl when one of our guys came in January of 2009, and his family was from London, Ontario, which is an excellent trauma center, and clinically he would have received top-notch care. And yet I knew he would be the only guy there, and we had 2 other military members in Ottawa undergoing rehab, and pushed very hard to have him come to Ottawa. And I think that did make a huge difference, because one of his master corporals, this was a young private, took him under his wing, and literally I think that element of peer support did more for this young lad in terms of his rehabilitation than any amount of expertise from a physical perspective that we could have provided him in that high center. So I think, you know, directing care in the appropriate sphere is important. And we have a few members here that have gone through rehab centers where a group of them have all gone through at the same time. And I think what I've heard from them is that made a huge difference in terms of their rehabilitation and motivation. It brings me to the next point, civilian versus military rehabilitation. So as I mentioned, the fact that we have our members in civilian centers, contrary to the American model where you have centralized military hospitals, as we used to have in the 90s, but which we don't have anymore, means that we often have an amputee who's aspiring to jump out of planes and parachute next to a diabetic dysvascular amputee who might be 75. And not to say that neither one of them can contribute something to the other. It becomes disheartening for the young lad to say, look, I want to get to this level, when people around him are saying, well, that's impossible, we've never done that. So it's raised the bar for our civilian centers to achieving things that nobody thought was possible. And in fact, some of the younger patients, whether they're firefighters or policemen or members doing similar jobs but on the civilian side, essentially pushed their organizations, the workmen's compensation organizations, to get funding for prosthetic devices and the pieces of equipment that wouldn't have otherwise been funded. So I consider our soldiers amazing ambassadors out there in terms of pushing the envelope. And that makes us uncomfortable sometimes, because we're often in a position where we don't feel we can deliver. And there are very real fiscal measures, and this is where I have to talk off the record, when leaders provide opinions, well-meaning opinions at the bedside, and promise things that we can't deliver on, or that for whatever reason higher up is not acknowledged, then it puts us as clinicians in a very difficult position to then try to backtrack and say, well, we can't deliver on this promise. So those notions of civilian centers drawing from our expertise, even though they're the ones with the clinical expertise, I think is a win-win situation. The peer support element, as you'll hear from Carolyn, my esteemed colleague from the Injured Soldiers Network, is an element which, again, I can't say over and over enough, is crucial to the success of any physical rehabilitation program. The families, getting them involved. I mean, clearly on weekends, evenings, nights, I mean, who's at the bedside on a regular basis? By the same token, it's interesting to note that a young private who enrolled at age 17 or 18 and who's always been told what to do. And now we're putting him in a position where he has to decide for himself what he's going to be doing for the rest of his life. It becomes a very difficult role reversal to get back into that mindset as to how do I take charge now of my life. And rehab is all about empowerment, and yet in the military hierarchy, if you're a private, well, you're anything but empowered, right? People tell you what it is you have to do and when you have to do it. And so that's where the goals and the vision and the life plan comes in. You know, we ran a program in Valcartier this fall. It was the second, it's called the Discovering the Power in Me program. And it's interesting, these serendipitous meetings you have in an airport in Vancouver. I met a gentleman called Blake Williams who works for the Pacific Institute out of Seattle. And some of you, I think, have come across this program because I know some bases have run the Discovering the Power in Me program. And I've always been a firm believer that what we think is how we act and behave and feel. And so if you can change the way you think, you're likely going to change the way you perform and behave, and likely also change where your life is going to go. And the whole premise of that program is that your life slate has been wiped clean by one of these events, and you have to rewrite the pages, and you're the only one who can rewrite those pages. We can just give you the tools. I think where rehab sometimes is criticized is that other than or contrary to acute care medicine, where you can provide a surgical intervention which will give immediate or fairly quick results, you can't administer rehabilitation. It's a self-administered phenomenon. You can't administer a gold medal to an athlete. You can just coach them to reach that goal. They have to do the hard work. And it's hard work. I mean, as you've seen, this is brutal, painstaking work, and physioterrorists have been called that for a reason, right, or occupational terrorists, because they make you suffer. And I've been to some of these sessions led by some of our amputees, and I consider myself in pretty good shape, but I've not sweat that much in any workout. And when the guy without legs tells you, I think you can do one more push-up, sir, well, you better well do one more push-up, right? So there's no excuses. So I think we all tend to draw inspiration from our patients, and hopefully they can draw inspiration or at least guidance from us, if nothing else. So that life plan, knowing where you're going, why you're doing this for, why am I suffering through all this? And it's a very valid question, and one where we, again, as clinicians, don't always have the answers. The biggest single goal that most soldiers have told me when they've come through is, I want to stay in uniform, I want to get back to be with my buddies, and I want to work on my military career, whether it's doing exactly what I did before or in some other capacity. And they have a right to request that, because let's be honest, we have a society of fairly sedentary, obese people, and this is again off the record, my personal opinion, that are occupying administrative positions and that barely meet their fitness standards, when we have guys that are doing superhuman efforts that many of us in this room would not be capable of, carrying fully loaded rucksacks for 16K and marching with a prosthetic limb. And we're saying, well, you don't meet the universality of service standards, so you can't stay in uniform. You know, I mean, in terms of the toughness threshold, in terms of what they can do, the question is well posed. Well, why can't they sit behind a desk and do the paperwork that this other person is doing that can barely pass their fitness test? You know, but again, I speak off the record. This is not to be published, hopefully, in the Globe and Mail tomorrow morning, right? So that brings us to research and new therapies. There's so much media attention on technology being the thing that's going to save us. And I think whereas technology has brought us a long way, when you look at medicine, what were the big advances in medicine, right? Clean water, you know, basic hygiene and things like that, simple things. Well, I think in rehab, it's often the simple things that make the biggest difference. The guys that go to these conferences, and there's been some amazing Wounded Warriors conferences and triathlons and so forth. What do they talk about? I mean, what the soldiers talk about? Cars, I guess, girls, and then their prostheses if they've got an artificial leg. So they compare notes, right? Well, if I had one of those, I'd be able to do what you're doing. Or if I had one of those, then I would have passed my battle fitness test. And again, that becomes a touchy issue because, as was mentioned before, rehab is very much individual. It's one-to-one, and there's not one recipe that fits all. And so to have this comparison is useful to the extent that it tweaks my mind, say, okay, I hadn't really thought that that component might be useful for this guy. But on the other hand, you can sometimes end up buying all kinds of technology thinking that that's going to be the solution to your problems. And especially when the prosthesis becomes sort of the expression of your emotional woes. And I think that was brought out very clearly, is that we've still, even though the stigma has been brought down, are much better at expressing our physical pain than our emotional pain. And then on that basis, people will focus on their prosthetic limb and say, that's the problem. If you only got me a bloody knee component that fit properly, or a leg that fit properly, I'd be able to do these things. And I'm not saying that that's not the case in some circumstances, but often it becomes the sole focus of where the problem lies. In terms of pain management, it's a huge issue. Obviously, I think we could spend a whole day and a whole week talking about pain management. If you're in pain, if you're not sleeping, if you're not resting enough, there's no way we can push you enough, or you can push yourself enough to do the rehab you need to do to get back to where you want to be. So it behooves us to be on the latest in terms of pain management. Very brief note on stem cell therapy. The whole push, particularly from our Chinese colleagues in terms of injecting stem cells for spinal cord regeneration, is a bit of a slippery slope. I mean, notwithstanding all the debate about the ethics and so forth of stem cells, I think when we embrace technology that hasn't yet been proven, again with well intent, and we had the situation once where one of our generals was ready to sign off, you know, $2 million, get him over to China and let's inject the stem cells. I don't think we know enough yet about that to go there. So the intent is good, but sometimes good intent can actually cause harm. And I think that's where we all have to be careful. I've done it. Iatrogenic disability is a real phenomenon. You listen to your patients, you care about your patients, you want to help them, but sometimes you actually do too much good in the wrong sense. And stem cell therapy, amongst others unproven yet, may be one of those things that we have to be careful before we start offering treatments like that. And the last thing, as I was mentioning, sort of dovetailing with what I said, was honesty. Let's just be honest and call a spade a spade. If someone is aiming for a goal, no matter how laudable that goal is, and it's seeming, for all intents and purposes, it's unachievable, and Sergeant Bouchard had an excellent point in Valcartier, you know, we're pushing people to the limits, right? We're expecting them to do things that are almost superhuman, and then what's going to be the cost down the road? As a rehab specialist, my goal is to hopefully keep people functional as long as possible. So if we make them into super athletes right now, but they're football players later on, with all that we know football players have to harbor in terms of sequelae of injury later on, have we done them a favor? Or is it not about community reintegration and resuming a reasonably normal life for the rest of your life, and not just for the immediate short term? And so that's again where the short-term goals and long-term goals, I think, need to mesh. And that's basically where I'm going to end it. Thank you for listening to my candid comments, and again, hopefully there are no publications that will put this into the newspaper tomorrow, but thank you.
Thank you for that candid presentation, Marcus. And our next speaker for the panel is Carolyn Robert. Carolyn is the manager of the Injured Soldier Network and section head of the Soldier On.
Thank you. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity and privilege to be here today. A little bit like Lieutenant Colonel Bessman, I've been asked to speak from the heart, and that's what I'm going to do today. I'm here to talk to you about peer support for the physically ill and injured. I believe that Lieutenant Colonel Grenier and Tom Martineau described all the dimensions of peer support, so I'm not going to sell it for you today. But I'm going to let you know a little bit more about myself, why I do this, and why it is so important to consider our physically ill and injured in the equation of peer support. So the privilege for me to be here today is a bit higher. I don't know, I'm a social worker, mental health social worker. I started in '99 in Canadian Forces Base in Valcartier, it's in the Quebec province. What I've discovered in my clinic years is how strongly these ill and injured feel about their own adaptation to situation. That's something I realized in the very first weeks that I started there. And the only sentence I had in my mind was, "Welcome to Mars." As Lieutenant Colonel Besseman described, these individuals have this will and power to go above and beyond. They are going above and beyond all statistics. And they are showing us every day that they can push the limits and the boundaries. So now, asking myself, what can I do to push forward those limits and boundaries to support them a bit better? So being a mental health social worker, you start thinking and you look at your clients. What's the missing link? You realized that you thought you knew something, but in fact you knew nothing. Who are the subject matter experts? They are our ill and injured members. We have two today from the Injured Soldier Network, Sergeant Bedard and Corporal Nickel. And please, during the break and at lunch, go meet with them. These are the real subject matter experts. Jason's going like, oh no. Yes, I want you to know them. I want you to hear what they have to say. Why? Because I can talk all day, and all the clinician and the expert, we can talk all day. What's it worth if it's not real? What is it worth if that's not meeting their needs? I'm not only a social worker, I'm a spouse. My husband's a military. I've been with him for 15 years, so I got to know a little bit of those sides that as a clinician you're very interested in when you work in the military. My husband is also an injured CF member. He's been injured in '07. That's when I realized that I didn't quite knew a lot of things about being injured, even after all those years as a clinician. I discovered another dimension. What I've discovered, I knew from my practice, but it became more real, that when you become injured, the injured themselves starts to try to figure out a way out. Okay, I want a new life. I want my life back. What is the new normal? And then they start to compare themselves. Well, there are all these services for the one who've been injured in Afghanistan. There are all those services for the combat zones. And thank you, Stéphane, Lieutenant Colonel Grenier, call him Stéphane all the time, for mentioning that stop thinking about combat. There are other types of injuries and illnesses, and these have to be considered. It's not a must. They need to be. Why? I'll talk about my husband a little bit. He's my research center. My husband's been injured while doing PT. We're living in Victoria, BC at the time. He hasn't been injured in Afghanistan. So the first thing that happened, he wasn't treated as the Afghanistan injured. It's not a combat injury. Second thing that happened is that he believed it. My injuries are not as important as those who got injured in combat. And I'm not taking anything away from those who got injured in combat, okay? All I'm saying is that when we look at our patients, at our clients, we need to see them as someone who's suffering, who has something to say, and who has needs. And if we start segregating, oh, well, these are the war heroes, they should get those treatments, and everybody else will be seen after, then we're missing the boat. They are all part of this group that need helps, okay? I'm sure, and we were talking this morning about Jason saying, well, I'm in pain today, okay? Can we segregate pain based on where you've been injured? No, okay? So there comes the idea of providing peer support for all injured and ill Canadian Forces personnel. And that's what the Injured Soldier Network is all about. You are suffering. No matter where you've been injured, no matter how much you're suffering, no matter what type of injury or illness you had to go through, you may need to talk about it. And there are things I will never understand. I may have books I can read, but I will never truly understand. How they can get that help is to talk to another injured. To say, not how does this feel, because they know, but to share experience, to feel that for once they are understood. When my husband talks to me about his brain injury, about how frustrated he is to go up the stairs and not remember why he was up the stairs, that has to come back and ask me, I can't understand. I can keep telling him as a good clinician or wife, well, do you have your little note about what you were supposed to do? This is such a good idea. It seems like a good idea when you're a clinician. Yes, it can help. For him, sorry for my term, it's total bullshit. He wants to be able to remember by himself. He wants someone to acknowledge how he feels. Who can acknowledge that? Someone who went through the same journey. Someone who's facing the same things. So, thanks again to Stéphane, who was a pioneer for peer support services in the Canadian Forces for members with an OSI. I was able a year ago to start the peer support program for the physically ill and injured, acknowledging that them too have the need to talk to others. And they have this need, but they also have the right to meet other members who have experience, who have been trained and certified to do so. The Injured Soldier Network is all about safety. We want the members to feel safe. A little bit like Tom was saying, it's their job, they're doing it. And they know they are very well trained at OSIS. Same thing with the Injured Soldier Network. We want our peer support, and with the ISN, it's we have volunteers still working and veterans. And we want them to be trained, certified, so they can offer safe services to others. You can say, well, on an informal matter, injured and ill will meet at the rehab center and their units, they will talk, they will exchange ideas. But when you have someone who's been trained, who know what he's talking about, who can support others, then you start to have a relief. You start to see the members saying, okay, now I'm talking to someone who's safe, who won't judge me, can exchange, who can really support me the extra mile. So that missing link is very, very important. It's nothing as a clinician I can bring to another injured. It's nothing that the best doctor in the world can bring them. If someone goes to Sergeant Bedard or Corporal Nickel and talks about their injury, they are things that they know that I'll never be able to know. Okay? I can comprehend, I have a brain, I can start to figure this out. But the feelings, what it means for real, I'll never know. So peer support for the physically ill and injured, truly believe in it. So it's for, the Injured Soldier Network is for all type of injuries and illness, independently from the location. And it's not only about severe injury or illness, or very severe injury or illness like we like to call it as clinicians. It's for all life-changing injury or illness. As soon as it changed their life, and they feel that they need to meet with someone else, that's the referral process. It stops there. Something happened, you want to meet with someone, we have someone for you. At this time, we're having 14 certified and trained peer support volunteers in Canada, spread across the country. We're looking forward to train more in Edmonton in a month, and then in Quebec City in the spring, later in spring, and another training. So hopefully we'll have about 40 peer support volunteers by the end of the year, ready to support others. So that's one program, and I can answer all your questions about that a little bit later. Another program I manage is called Soldier On program. What Soldier On is all about is improving the quality of life of the ill and injured CF personnel with a permanent and chronic injury or illness. What do? Is they provide recreation, sport, and fitness opportunities for them to increase their quality of life. Not only for them, but also for their family members. So how do we do this? And Patrick, I will use your example because it's a good one. Sergeant Bedard wanted to learn how to bike again. He wanted to do sport. So through the Soldier On Fund, we gave him a grant to buy an adapted bike. So he started to do it. Not only we do that, but we provide the support. We do clinics to have them learn the new sport, new opportunities, face new things. We want them to find all opportunities available so they can improve quality of life, meet with other injured, and see that things are possible. It's either for them to remain active, have an active lifestyle, or if they want to go above and beyond, it's feasible. For example, we have a member, 22 years old, single leg amputee, who discovered sledge hockey a year ago during the Paralympics in Vancouver. So we brought a team of injured and ill there to discover the Paralympic sports with their families. He discovered that, went back on the base. 2 weeks later, there was a sledge hockey clinic on base, and he loved it. So there he trained all summer long. And last September, only a few months later, not a year later, a few months later, he went to the Hockey Canada selection camp and got picked. This is an incredible story. So what Soldier On did for him? Well, he wanted to practice. He wanted to learn more about this. We paid for the clinic. We paid for him to meet with other sledge hockey players. We gave him the grant that he applied for to play at the arena during the summer, and we sent him to the Hockey Canada practice weekend. And there he got picked. So these are the kind of things Soldier On can do. If you want to know more, and I know I'm finished now, soldieron.ca. Please go and see. You'll get more information on that, and I'm willing to answer all questions during lunch if you have more. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Okay, I would like to do a quick wrap up with this panel and then offer the opportunity for just one question, because we want to quickly transition to the soul, and then nothing but the Padres are going to keep us from the food, so we want to keep them on track. I pray for that. Thank you, Mr. Katz, again, and to all of you who are invited, who are involved in Operation Men. What a wonderful program, a phenomenal program. Again, we've heard about peer support and the idea of civilian centers needing to draw from military expertise. The frank discussion that was given to us and shared with us by Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Baseman. Thank you for being so candid. One size doesn't fit all. We keep hearing that. We keep hearing about peer support, and we have to find a safe place for our veterans. Again, other than combat injuries, we need to change our language. It sounds to me we need to change our language to something along the lines of operational stress injuries, which is a little bit more holistic. And we need to acknowledge that this is tough work. This is tough work for all, not just those who are recovering, but those who are helping them recover. So if I may open it up for one question from the audience. I'm okay with time, honestly. Come on up. There we go. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Commander Kathy Slomway, a medical officer in the Canadian Forces. We were hearing in the earlier panel, and even briefly mentioned by Tom, that anger can be one of those profound emotions that can be a barrier or a block. In your work or your fields, is anger also a challenge in developing that healing relationship?
I'll certainly take a stab at that, because I think we, as we started out, we didn't know a lot about what we were getting into when we took our first patient. If you can imagine that when the blast goes off and the individual is injured, the blast is not limited to that individual. There are successive concussion rings that go out from their spouses, their children, their family. And dealing with all of those emotions, particularly, can you imagine Aaron when he had to look at his face for the very first time? Because there was a period of time when he was recovering that he would walk past the mirror in his hospital room and he wouldn't look. He would turn away. And so the amount of anger that you would have when you saw his pre-photograph would almost look like Hollywood-esque, handsome. And dealing with that and just how it wrecks your entire life and how out of control it is. So yes, and we see it manifested in a lot of ways. Sometimes it's direct anger at us, at the world, but also in the way in which they treat their family members, and also how they tried to numb that through alcohol and through drugs and other issues. So for us, it's really important that we have the resources on hand to be able to address those immediately. So it's not just the face or the hand that we're dealing with, but that we also have the psychiatrists and the psychologists and social workers to be able to be there on hand to help us deal with them, but also deal with the individual. And then we also are very constantly concerned about looking after those that are providing the care, because there's an emotional toll that happens at our academic medical center in taking care of these individuals that we weren't prepared for at the very beginning, but I think we've done a much better job now.
I'd like to add one thing to this. When we talk about anger, there is one thing that the medical staff, I'm sure you can understand that, when you tell an injured member, you're going to be okay, that's going to be okay, that's often the sentence that pulls the trigger. When you say, how dare you can tell me that I'm going to be okay? And that's when peer support can help a lot. That when you have a peer who went through the same journey of recovery, coming and saying, that's going to be okay. Well, they know it's going to be okay. And that can be a big relief, and that can start curing that anger. Because finally, when it came out, somebody can echo to it and bring you in the healing process.
Let's give our panel a round of applause. Thank you. So if I may ask our chaplains to come forward, and Lieutenant Commander Chaplain Paul Smith, Chief Religious Program Specialist Patrick McCormick, Padre Captain Grant Shapansky, and Chaplain Captain Stephen DeFerb. Let's welcome our panel members. So first we'll have Lieutenant Commander Chaplain Paul Smith from the United States Marines start us off. So, Chaplain.
Good afternoon. It's the extreme honor to be able to participate with a very friendly crowd today, an interested crowd, in something that has been very up and close in my life and the life of my family. In 2005, I was on a small aircraft carrier in the Pacific, moving from Honolulu to Singapore to Guam to Australia. Did a couple of stops in the UAE, United Arab Emirates. While the war in Iraq was going on, this was the most that I was contributing at the time. I had follow-on orders for the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, which is in Camp Pendleton, which was in Iraq at the time. So I left the ship in October, and in January, the first few days of January, I had landed in Iraq. And I remember the very first words that came to mind, not to make light of it, was that, Paul, you're not in Kansas anymore. The level of destruction is unimaginable. My first day in Iraq at Al-Taqadum, TQ is what we affectionately refer to it as. I was called into a Fleet Surgical Center where a squad of Marines had just been attacked by a rocket-propelled grenade. And I was sharing with one of these Marines, a sergeant whose wife was 1 month away from bearing their first child. He and I both knowing that he was going to lose a part of his body, his ankle. And it was then that I realized that no matter what you say you're prepared for when you raise your right hand and take an oath to support and defend a country that I love and the people. Comes in all varieties, but I love each one. Knowing that somebody in a uniform has to do what we do, you never are prepared to embrace the ugly side. I think the word earlier was the obscene qualities of war. I made my way to Fallujah, which was a relatively modern city in Iraqi standards. A quarter of a million residents before the battle there in January of '05. Post-battle, there were 20,000 people inhabiting the city, and almost all of them living in bullet and bombed buildings, bullet-ridden and bombed buildings. And as we drove to the city on a number of times, I would travel in by convoy to check on, to be with my Marines. That's what I do. That's what I'm called to do, is wherever they are, to try to be there with them. I was amazed at the level of devastation. Some buildings having holes large enough to drive the Humvee that I was riding in straight through. And this was not my first encounter, though, with the ugly side of war, but it certainly it was a photo development of the unpolished consequences of war. So fast forward, I recently returned just a few months ago from Afghanistan, where I did most of my tour there in Camp Leatherneck, made visits into the city of Marja. And again, with boots on the ground for less than 48 hours, I was standing over the body of a young Marine, saying a prayer that begins a long series of prayers as this young Marine heads home, realizing that he's the age of my son, who himself is also a service member. Realizing once again that combat is a dreadful and horrific thing. And I can remember the first time seeing the cliched 1,000-yard stare in a service member and realizing exactly what I was looking at. You can have it described and you can read about it, but until you've seen something in the eyes of a service member, I recall the words I read recently from a British naval captain who himself said that the essence of war is violence. And the etymology of that word violence is really quite simple: physical force used to inflict injury or damage. But where that injury and damage occurs is not always obvious. We see a veteran who is in a wheelchair and we hear a story of battle and of wounds and we know what we're looking at. But many of the injuries and wounds are not so easily identified. So being in combat or being simply deployed in a combat or war zone, as it's been mentioned earlier, something that I realized personally from the very beginning, from my own changes, it changes a person on many levels. Now, I think it's important to say, and I think it's been mentioned, that just because a person changes doesn't mean that that person is broke or lesser in some way. But pure and simple, it does change you. And all of life's experiences change who we are and into what we are becoming. But it seems to me, this is just my perspective, that the time-condensed, stressful, violent nature of a combat deployment has the capacity to change a person faster than their built-in abilities of assimilation can accommodate. So even when our assimilation capacities are operating at their very best, they cannot negate the permanent impact upon an individual's personality, their psyche, and their general emotional self that a combat stress does. So, the question is, what are we to do? And while the religious role that I play and the path that the long string of people that I have walked in their footsteps urges me to work toward a world where peace prevails, I'm also a realist and understand that peace is much more than a political position. It is also something each of us strives for on a personal and interpersonal level every single day. And for combat veterans, peace is often an elusive and absent feature. So what do we do? Well, where can we strive to help bring peace? I want to propose, just in conclusion, that there are two things, at least from the Marine Corps side of the house. I'm a Navy chaplain. The Marines don't have chaplains, so they borrow us from the Navy. The two words that seem to be have come to the surface is mitigation and resiliency. And as already been mentioned, resiliency may be a word that we have to unpack based on where we are and where we're coming from, but we achieve one through the other. Combat operational stress, and I'm going to quote, is, I'm quoting from a study that was done by someone who was headed up by Captain Bill Nash, who was already mentioned by Stefan. Combat operational stress, and I think this is important to understand because, again, this is the distinction between civilian and military. Combat operational stress is not an unintentional byproduct of military training and operations, but an integral characteristic of both realistic training and operations. Military commanders intentionally impose stress on their troops during training to familiarize them with the essential nature of combat and to make them more capable and resilient to the challenges that they will later face during actual operations. And commanders lead their troops through sometimes extreme stress on their way to victory in the battlefield. So even under the most ideal and prepared training situations, we cannot completely remove the negative impact of combat stress upon service members or their families and friends. So what we strive to do is to help, at least from my side of the house and from the clinical side of the house that I work alongside, is to help the service members become increasingly stronger, more resilient to stress before they encounter it. And part of this strategy is mitigating the often longer-term effect of combat stress through combat and operational stress control programs and policies. So what I have seen metamorphose is a metamorphosis since Iraqi freedom and now with our troops in enduring freedom in Afghanistan was at first we called it combat operational stress control. And it was a fairly compact program, basically saying, okay, this is what it is, this is how we identify it, let's see what we can do to kind of fix it. Well, now when we are going to have boots on the ground between Iraq and Afghanistan for nearly a decade, naturally things change. We begin to rifle in on how we can make something better. And so instead of taking this broad stroke, we begin to take very strategic and calculating approaches. And so there's a new program that has recently come out that I think that for the Marine Corps side of the house have really got this one right. And it's called the OSCAR program. It's that OSCAR stands for Operational Stress Control. And then this is the important part. We understand the first one, operational stress control, but then readiness, OSCAR. OSCAR is a surgical, if you will, or strategic approach to preparing Marines and sailors before they go into combat on what to look forward to, what you're going to see. And what it has done is it has taken the MDs and the PsyDs and the EDs and everybody that's at the upper echelon of care that we tend to push people up to when they need them, is that now what we have done is we have pulled them down into this lower echelons of care. So instead of having someone at a regional center at a hospital, now, at least for the division, for our infantry Marines, if you will, is we've taken those doctors, those MDs, those social workers, those counselors, and we've pushed them all the way down to the regiment and to the battalions. And so now you know your clinician by first name. And you don't have to go and, you know, I need to go all day. I'm going to be at medical because, well, why are you going to medical? Well, I've got to go, you know, see a doctor. What kind of doctor? You know, you kind of push all of that aside. And then these guys not only prepare and train with these Marines and sailors before they deploy, but then they go forward with them into theater. And they stay there with them. They help them when they need it. They support them when they need it. And then they return with them. And they continue to provide post-combat stress control. One of the things also that I play a role in that in the OSCAR is not only as a part of the training, part of the teaching, or the mentoring that I do, is that we enable or we empower the corporals, the sergeants, the staff sergeants to be able to identify these things and to look out. For Marines, it's very important that Marines take care of their own. They look after each other. And so what we have are Marine staff sergeants and corporals and sergeants who are saying, you know what? They're the first line of defense. Thank you. They're the first line of defense to say, okay, you know, Tom, there's something not quite right. And I can't quite pick up on it, but you know what? Let you and I talk about it. And then that first line of defense, you know, it may never go anywhere from there. But then we can say, well, you know what? This is something that I can't quite handle all by myself, but we know someone else who can provide help or can provide care. So the goal is reintegration. What we do in uniform is not a very friendly thing at times, and it can have enduring effects. But we also want to strive to reintegrate the service member, not only into the military if they want to continue to serve in that way, but also to reintegrate them into their family life, into their social life, into their personal life. And as has been mentioned before, let them be comfortable again in their own skin, in the new you, if you will. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chaplain. Chief McCormick.
Hooyah. Hooyah. That's called a war cry. Let's try it again. Hooyah. Okay, now for my Army brothers. Huh? Huh? All right, and now for my Marine brothers and sisters. Hoorah. Now, what I'm going to talk about is building spiritual resiliency and my role within a RMT, or religious ministry team. And the reason why that's important is because I work hand in hand with the chaplain. I'm his right-hand man or woman, whatever the case may be. And I fill a certain void that chaplains can't. I like to say that chaplains teach, preach, and counsel, and I take care of the rest. Okay. Excuse me. Let me get my notes. All right. Our mission is to provide religious ministry and support to those of our own faith. So we take care of our own, of course. We facilitate for all religious beliefs, regardless of what your flavor is. We take care of that too. We care for everybody. So Marines, sailors, Coast Guardsmen, and in cases where we work with our NATO brothers and sisters, we take care of them too. And of course, we advise commanders. We make sure that commanders don't screw up when they're about to make a bad decision. And that doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And oftentimes, chaplains are the first line of defense for that. So, what we do, we ensure that these brave men and women and their families are mission ready at all times through demonstrating spiritual, moral, and ethical maturity. This is supported through the innovative delivery of religious ministries. And of course, as Chap said, we cover the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard. However, RPs don't work with the Coast Guard for whatever reason. They don't want to employ us, so maybe in the future. We also provide support to the U.S. Army through individual augmentation. Okay, now to discuss what I am and what I do. To everyone's surprise, I am not a chaplain. I am not a chaplain in training, and I never will be. That's for them. They're the experts. I provide everything else. So, the question is, what do I do? Well, as my slogan up there, it says exceeding the expected. So the expect is a specific standard, and I exceed that. And the reason why I exceed that is because I'm the jack of all trades. What I provide is logistical, supplies, administration, advisement. What's really unique about my position in the Navy as an enlisted service member is I have the unique opportunity to provide advice up and down the chain of command, which typically doesn't happen in the enlisted world. So I'm afforded a huge bonus of confidence because of that. Expeditionary ministry support, what that means is similar to what you would see as a Secret Service. I'm not a bodyguard, but I provide the expertise to make sure that the chaplain can do their job effectively and efficiently at all times. So I carry the weapons, they do not, because they're non-combatants. We also deal with administration, finance and accounting, and I won't bore you with the finance and accounting, but sometimes we have to hire civilians to facilitate for certain faith groups, and we handle that as well. And what's really interesting is we're librarians too. We carry very large weapons, and we are librarians, if you can imagine. But we typically only do that aboard ships. So I'm sure there'll be follow-on questions to what I do. Again, I'm not a chaplain. I could never be one. I really applaud what they do, and I also applaud everyone for being here. As a service member that's had boots on the ground numerous times, I didn't know that this resource was available, and I'm really appreciative. Thank you.
If I may, Padre Grant Shapansky.
We don't have your trade, and a few of us wish we did. In the Canadian chaplaincy, we have to be the jack of all trades. It is an honor to be part of this day conference. It's not as unusual as maybe used to be included in the domain of biopsycho-spiritual understandings of who we are. But it's tremendous to see that that's still happening, and we're still riding that wave. I only have a couple quotes from my presentation this morning. This morning, it's still morning. Well, lunch is coming, though. One is from Bill O'Hanlon, and if you've read his book on spirituality as a psychotherapist, it's one of my favorite quotes. It's challenging to discuss spirituality. Spirituality can be ineffable, mysterious, and hard to pin down, like nailing Jell-O to a tree. So when you talk about evidence-based, there's been a lot of research in the last 30 years that would say that there are health benefits, if you've read the research at all, to practice of faith, not just intellectual belief and adherence, but practice of faith. And that's true in the mental health world. So whether it's the research or our clients who are telling us that we want spiritual care as part of our mental health care, it doesn't matter to me. One way or the other, spirituality is part of the biopsychosocial spiritual care system, at least it is in Canada. One other quote, and it's because I think I wanted to throw in one quote around spirituality just so you know how I think about it. And it's not a bunch of spiritual care providers, but it was from a National Consensus Conference in 2009. And it's I found this quote, or this definition on Christina Pachowski's Jewish site on spirituality and health care. So one sentence, and then I'll talk more about what I do. Spirituality is the aspect of humanity that refers to the way individuals seek and express meaning and purpose, and the way they experience their connectedness to the moment, to self, to others, to nature, and to the significant or sacred. So we could have all kinds of definitions, but I thought that was well said, and that really is the domain of what I am entitled as a health services mental health chaplain. So in the Canadian Forces, we have Reg Force chaplains that number just under the 200 mark, and then we have reservist chaplains that number around 140 chaplains, and then there are 6 chairs. We are far and few between, but there are 6 chairs that sit in the mental health clinics across the country that are designated as health services mental health chaplain chairs. Relatively new idea, the last 10 years. That chaplain must have not only his denominational background training to be a chaplain in the Canadian Forces, but that chaplain must also have at least a master's level, Master of Arts, pastoral counseling or psychology degree to sit in that chair. And so we sit on the mental health teams in these clinics. We sit in case conference, we sit at intake. We are part of the assessment process when clients are referred to mental health. As part of the screening package, there's a screening tool that is a self-scoring screening tool that every client has when they come in for assessment. Up until just a month or 2 ago, we were using Pachowski's FICA, if you know that tool. It's been around for a while. Basic questions that ask about faith community, how important it is for that client personally. Are they part of a faith community? And how would you like us to address this piece if it is important to you in your treatment? Very basic questions. And then chaplains in Ottawa decided that maybe we'd develop our own tool. So I just want to tell you what those few questions are that are part of the screening package that are self-scoring. And it's a basic Likert scale, 1 to 5, and so the client comes in and self-scores these basic screening questions, and then it's handed back into the clinician. Question number 1. Things that are meaningful in my life have been altered by my operational experience. Question number 2. I am able to forgive people who I feel have done me wrong. Question number 3. The quality of my relationships with others has been affected by my operational experience. Question number 4. I am able to forgive myself. Question number 5. My capacity to trust myself or others has been diminished by my operational experience. Question number 6. I am able to feel love and affection in my life. Question number 7. I have goals and dreams for my life. Number 8. Spirituality and faith are important in my life. 9. My spirituality has been affected by my operational experience. And the last question, I would like to explore spiritual issues in my recovery. So after assessment, often we, as mental health chaplains, will get referral from those screening tools, or direct from clinicians, or sometimes down the chaplain chain, we will have referrals. I'll tell you one story. I had a call from the base clinic primary care one day from a physician who said, I'd like to make a referral to your clinic, which is secondary care, but the client, the patient is saying, I'm not interested in seeing anyone on that team until I told him there was a chaplain on the team. I said, I'll see the chaplain, but I don't want to do any assessments. He's not ready for that. So I said, sure I'll see him. And so the brief story, as you can guess, is that we made good connection, there was good rapport. That happened a good handful of times, and I like to use the word massaging. It was not long until I massaged this fine gentleman when he was ready in to see the psychiatrist and psychology. That gentleman went back to his unit, who was still very reserved around mental health piece, and is really making some good inroads with other peers that are struggling. Trauma can threaten all parts of us, whether it's the biological, psychological, social, or spiritual parts of ourselves. And my belief that that spiritual piece of us needs to have intentional care as much as any other piece. I mentioned Bill O'Hanlon once before, so, what's the work of spirituality? I like synchronicity is a wonderful thing, and so we heard this morning, connection. To focus to help this client connect with their deeper self, connect again with their body, connect again with each other. Make those kinds of connections in community. Isolation, disconnection is a common theme in trauma. Connection for some through nature, connection through art. In our clinic right now we have two groups running. One is based around soapstone carving, which is an artsy thing to do. And in that group, where the activity is carving soapstones, individuals, generally males, begin to talk. And out of that, of course, is some therapeutic kinds of benefits. We also have a mindfulness meditation group run by one of the psychiatrists. Some wonderful things happening in that group. I'd like to read a little poem from a client who gave me permission to read. The first piece is early recovery. Pain and confusion, water at a boil, a mirror with no image, a garden with no soil. Your space is closing in, ground beneath you is not there. Living a life of sin, looking for somewhere, a flame with no torch, river with no water, depressed, disrespected, sorrow upon sorrows, insecure and violated, an emotion of no morals, the universe with no stars, walking with death, feeling hopeless indeed, with a slap to the face. The second piece comes later on in recovery. Dealing with anything, glorious day to discover one's own inner being, one's own rejoice, sense of righteousness, overcome any mountain, the head is raised high, walking tall, feeling of security, patriotic and loved, freedom to cry, freedom to finally understand, hands no longer tied, the light shines bright by day and night, time has no time, I have done no crime, my life has life, surrounded with hope, for now we cope. The other place, the mental health chaplain will be on the team is the decompression teams that have been talked about in Cyprus. The one piece that I would add is the chaplain, again, is very much part of that team. Up until recently, there was an optional session that was called Spirituality and Operations. There was some concern by the leadership that this would not be attended. And so I talked to the good colonel and I said, sir, I'll keep track of the stats and I'll let you know how many people are choosing to come to this presentation. When all is said and done, my stats were that 23% of all the returning troops through Cyprus this last spring chose to come to that presentation. My point is to the good colonel and to those of you who work in mental health that most often I have found that our clients, our patients, are more open to the subject of discussing their spirituality, where they're at, than many of us are as clinicians and leaders. And, you know, I think once we kind of get past that and find that we really can go there with our clients, some good things can be done. I'm supposed to sum up. I think there are some things that we need to keep doing and keep doing well. For those who are professional spiritual leaders, we need to keep working hard to build bridges within the mental health world. Many of my colleagues are quite excited about multi-faith movements and working together, interfaith. I often say to them, I'm excited about that, but I'm as excited or more about multidisciplinary movement in spirituality and healthcare. There's some wonderful things we can do as we learn about each other, find the common ground, and find out that we can work really well together. Sometimes that will mean referral to specialists. Sometimes that will mean that we need to look to either community clergy or chaplains within the forces. And sometimes that just means we need to broach the subject with our clients and have the courage to talk about it. They'll lead us just like they do on anything else they present with us. And so thank you for the opportunity to present today. I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Chaplain. And the last one, last presenter for this morning is Chaplain Captain Stephen Defer, Chaplain, Joint Personnel Support Unit, Edmonton, Alberta. Thank you, sir.
So I'm going to pick on Colonel Martin for a second here because I gather he's got a sense. I've never met the man before, but I hope he's got a sense of humor. He sent me an email 5 days ago and said, Steve, no slides and keep it short. I said, you don't even know me. He says, there's two things every preacher loves, and I'm the God chaplain. I'm not the clinical one. I'm actually the God chaplain. Two things every preacher loves. You know what they are? Sound of their own voice and God, and usually in that order. So with that, I'll begin. So I joined 1 PPCLI, which is an infantry battalion, about 6 months after they came home from our first combat operation tour in Afghanistan. And that was kind of a baptism or rebaptism for a big hunk of our army. And I served them for about a year, and then we got back on this long, cumbersome thing we call a trip, the road to war. So for another year, we stopped licking our wounds and got back to the business of going back there. And of course, a year after that, we went there. We went back to Afghanistan with much of the same leadership, the same young men, the same wounded warriors that had been on the previous one, because that's part of the function. When I finished my tour, I was in Afghanistan at the time, and a friend and colleague of mine, she's responsible for moving us around and so on, she phoned and said, where would you like to go next? I said, I'm comfortable where I am, and here I'm sitting in the middle of a desert talking on the radio phone. She goes, no, we got to move you around. I said, well, I'm going to send you to a unit called the Joint Personnel Support Unit. I said, what's that? He said, that's the unit that looks after all our wounded warriors. I said, game on. Okay, let's go. So that's where I am now, and that's a place where we bring all our partnerships together. And you've heard smatterings of that, but it includes the OSIS crew and Veterans Affairs, and it's a complex snippet. It's like nailing jello to a tree. It's a lot of partners with a lot of vested stakes, a lot of vested interest in these young men and women we call our soldiers. So I'm going to work from a common definition of spirituality, and of course, in my world, spirituality isn't a simple line. It's a whole lifelong. It's a journey. Nail it down. It could take us books and volumes and so on, but I'm going to try and keep it simple. If we keep it simple, the idea is something, it's about making meaning, right? We can all buy into that. Somehow it's about taking life's events. Who am I now? What has this done to me, and what do I think about all this? It speaks the language of integration. To be a little more specific, I'm going to talk about warrior spirituality. And in my nation, in my country, in my church, that's not a comfortable place to go. Because a warrior is something we don't necessarily talk about in our open forums. What does that mean? And I'm going to go a little bit further and talk about what does it mean to be a wounded warrior. Because that path actually takes a very characteristic, it's a, pardon my language, it's a hell of a task. It is not a pleasant journey. And I use the term warrior very deliberately and very cautiously. Because I'm not talking about those who got wounded only in combat. To point out good Colonel's comments this morning. I'm talking about all those who chose to serve. My other life, I volunteered as a police chaplain. I see the same thing there. I've served in the Armed Forces, Canadian Forces, for 23 years. I was the platoon commander in the Balkans over a decade ago. I've watched guys break their legs, get cancer, die from ALS. Illness and injury comes in many different forms and it affects us as human beings in a very powerful way. That path goes from warrior. You get a character, and as soon as I say that word, there's a picture that goes on in your head, I can guarantee you. If we were in a kindergarten class and I asked you to draw it with crayons, it'd all come out the same. Typically some young guy who's virtually invincible, looks a bit like Arnold Schwarzenegger, not to talk about Hollywood and this beautiful state of yours. I said, that's a caricature, what we're talking about. Because that warrior, a real warrior, follows a path. Because that person steps up to that plate and swings to hit that home run, and in that process, they get wounded. And no one escapes that reality. That's a truism. It's not in the recruiting brochure, but it's there. And in that woundedness, they take an incredible path. It's a path of decision, of determination, that takes passion and conviction and leadership, and is a path they do not walk alone. And when they stand back up again, that long journey, that lifelong journey in some ways, what do you think comes out on the other end? It's what I call enlightened human being. What comes on the other end of that is a converted person. We said that this morning, eh? War changes a person, life changes a person. There's only one truth about life, is that it's constantly in change. Everything about us, every amazing experience we have, every sad one, every great one, it changes the person who we are. War is no exception to that. And so are all the other bumps along the way. It's a privilege as a pastor to learn from soldiers. And I say that very carefully and very deliberately, to serve with them. And to understand that in that very process, you're a part of this. Before I went to Afghanistan, I had this clever notion. I took all the notes, actually read all the lessons learned from my colleagues, which that's kind of most pastors, we don't do that so well. We get our own ideas and away we go. But I actually read all these notes. I said, I'm going to take the best practices. I'm going to start taking notes about certain things. My real goal was to get a sense of how these men and women dealt with people when in the worst of circumstances, so death. Violent, horrible, gruesome death. How do you deal with this piece? And I did. I took all these notes, and eventually I went to my commanding officer and said, this is what I'm going to do. I said, when this happens, and I'm a realistic man, it's going to happen. I know exactly the country we're going into. I have no idea when, but I got a pretty good idea. I think I can prepare myself at least somewhat for it. This is a program we're going to take. In a nutshell, how many social workers do we have in the room, by the way? Okay, good, good. In a nutshell, because this is about you guys, in a nutshell, this is a path it took. Inevitably, it always happened some distance from me. That means they hauled me back to Kandahar Airfield to take part in, and when it was our own, to lead a ramp ceremony, ceremony, which is a big part of spirituality. It's a big part of grieving. And it is a powerful, powerful experience. In 7 minutes on a ramp in Afghanistan, you experience more human emotion and more drama than I ever have in hours in a church. And I can't explain it beyond that. It's extraordinary. I stood with a young American chaplain who sent 8 of his young fellows home one day, and of course I did more than enough of my own. And I prayed deliberately for months that I would be the first Canadian battle group chaplain not to have to do that, and that was shattered 8 days later. 8 days after I hit the ground, poof, game on. I guess you're not going to answer that one, at least not the way I wanted you to. After the incident itself, I'd return to the fighting base, the patrol base where this incident occurred. So with his best friends and his buddies, or her best friends and her buddies, I was going back into battle. And I went with him. That was part of the deal. My commanding officer nodded his head and said, away you go. I hope you got some of that luck from the Almighty. And away we'd go. If anything at all, to reestablish confidence in themselves. And it's an extraordinary thing, because what happened about 12 hours after that, they'd start talking. And not, some of you identify different models of decompression and so on. It didn't take on a strict form. Often individual counseling, telling their stories. We'd be walking along some IED-infested road, and some young soldier start talking about his buddy who just died. It happens in the most amazing and surreal of places. But to get them back into the business of where they're going. And then after that, I'd finish with some ritual, and inevitably something else would happen, and I was off to the next fight. The story I'm going to tell you for the social workers in the room is about Sergeant John Wayne Fott. And again, I say John Wayne because you can't make that up in Hollywood. That really was his name. He died in January last year. And what makes him different from every other casualty in the unit I served is that he died while I was skiing in the Rocky Mountains. We get a hiatus where we get a 2-week holiday. And I'm skiing down the hill and I turn on the news that night and I see his face. And my wife will tell you, she was sitting here, she said, you were back in the desert right there on the spot. You were, and pardon the language, you were pissed off. I said, yes, I am. That's where I need to go back. And 4 days later, of course, I was back. I didn't go through that whole process, but by some divine intervention, and I use that word deliberately again, it followed that. A good friend and trusted colleague of mine handled the ramp ceremony, handled it with grace and poise and all the other things that we're expected to do. Gave great insight to these guys. And they went back in the battle. 2 days later, he said, where's the chaplain? Well, he's not here. Why not? Well, he was committed to other things, and other operations ongoing. Short answer was, we came up a bit short. And this social worker comes out of the woodwork and says, this 50-year-old lady says, I'll go. I can guarantee you that was the first time outside of the relative security Kandahar Airfield. Never been in a patrol base, never been in a FOB, never been in any of these places. And off she goes. So they put her in a car and they drive her down IED alley and away she goes. That's not the end of the story. The end of the story I'm going to quote from my journal. I don't know what other people write in their war journals, but I usually write funny stories and dirty jokes soldiers have told me. So, and I'll take out the expletives, but on a patrol about 14 or so days later, this young soldier says to me, he says, hey, you know, Padre, that social worker that came out, he says, see what she says here, he says, she did the same stuff for you, minus going picking a fight, and I'm taking out the swear words, minus picking a fight and the religious bits. I said, well, did that work for you? He goes, oh yeah, I'm good to go. And I laughed I went and thought, next time I got back to Kandahar, I went to tell her that story. Because my point is that if you engage in the business of healing others, you will engage in the world that most people turn to us for. You will deal with spirituality and you will deal with the soul. And you cannot put it in a petri dish. You cannot see it in MRI. You can't cut it open and you can't transplant it, but it's there. And we all know it. It's the big elephant in the room. Let's do it. Talk about it, because they will. It helps them name their grief. It helps them name themselves. It makes sense of who they are. Today, as I reflect on the lessons I've learned working with our wounded soldiers, and I kind of close on this, I give you some final thoughts. The battlefield at home, way more complex, way more enduring, and in some ways, way more dangerous than the one in Afghanistan. It's way more real. Because we're not fighting for a piece of dirt anymore. We're not fighting to win over a village. We're fighting to save human lives and to help them redefine themselves. It means naming the problem and the challenge of rehabilitation and reintegration. And it takes leadership, courage, compassion, wisdom, a willingness to walk with these people, to bring them back, to give them permission to use the language of warrior, despite their wounds. The enlightened one, the courageous one, the one who's got the scars to show from it. You know, my last offensive action in Afghanistan, I was walking with the most senior soldier in our battle group and his security party, and we're going into this village, and there's this young fella. He'd been stuck in the headquarters working in Kandahar for the whole tour, so he really wanted to get into some action. And he says, hey, Padre, maybe this time we'll get into a fight. And I kind of grimaced and put my head down, and I'm carrying a couple of 100 pounds like everybody else, it seems. We get into a hide, and I light up a cigarette, which I shouldn't tell my wife, and I hope this isn't being recorded. And I look at him, I said, son, you know the difference between an old warrior and a young one? Everybody starts, I didn't realize everyone was listening. He goes, nope. I says, a young one wants glory and an old one doesn't want any more, and I'll take out the swear words again. Young one doesn't want, or an old one doesn't want any more scars. We got enough already. I says, I hope we walk in here, have tea with these people, and we'll get back to being peacemakers and peacekeepers. I'm perfectly content with that because I'm here to win the war, not to win battles. And the RSM burst out laughing. Yep, and he's giggling away, and all the senior NCOs, they're all laughing. Exactly, because they knew how dangerous this was and what we're getting ourselves into. The challenge we face, and it's funny we call our wounded warriors patients, when in fact we're the ones that have to have patience. We demand it of them because they're going to be at this the rest of their lives, but it's us that need the patience here. If we're going to take a privileged position to walk with these people and to learn from these people and let them and that really is the golden piece if I get from a soldier's perspective. We can be very paternalistic, and coming from a clergy member, I'm quite comfortable with that. I know what that's like. It's easy for me. I can tell you how to live your life. Just ask me. What we have to have is the privilege and the courage to allow them to define themselves. In the Army, we're pretty good at telling a private what a private is and telling a corporal what a corporal is and a sergeant what a sergeant is. That's not what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with human beings who need to define themselves. Because on some level, that's what it means to be a human being. Maybe 90% of us is controlled by destiny and fate. But that 10%, that's the golden piece. That's what takes a young private and turns him into a psychiatrist 30 years later. That's what takes a young sergeant and turns him into a CEO or has him build his own company. Right? That's what makes a wounded warrior a mother. That's the piece that we're here for, and that's the piece we ought to be paying attention to. And if we're going to do that, and this is often a message I take to my colleagues, and I'll take it to all of you, because I know clinicians are often anxious around chaplains. You have every right to be. We have a long-standing history of very divided turfs. Again, name the elephant in the room. But if we're going to do that, we're not going to do it to my colleagues. We get all excited because we work ecumenical. We can, Roman Catholics like I am, Protestants, we can pretend not to fight with each other for a week. That's nothing. Or better yet, we can get multi-faith and invite the Jewish people and Muslims to the table with us. No, no, no. The peace here, these soldiers are so valuable. These human beings are so valuable and so complex, and we have so much to learn from that every one of our disciplines ought to stand together to learn from them. This is about a multidisciplinary effort. All the king's horses and all the king's men as it goes, right? Thus are we. Learn from this, learn from them, and thank you.
Oh, thank you, Chaplain Defer. I really don't need to summarize anything. You did it, and you did it oh so well. We're one question between us and the food. So I would like to entertain a question before we head upstairs. And we're going to go upstairs, grab our food, and come back down. And again, at each of the tables, we should have a panelist or a member in uniform to start and continue the dialogue over lunch. At the end of lunch, Lieutenant Colonel, I'll get it right, Doug Martin is going to come up here and close the conference for us. And then we're going to have the movie War Torn shown after 2 o'clock. So we hope that you enjoy your lunch. Oh, wait, do we have any questions for this panel? That maybe you can ask them individually if you like. So let's go ahead and go upstairs, grab your lunch, come on down and chat, and then we'll close the workshop to the movie War Torn.